We're able, let us rise for our gospel lesson. The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 8th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, but turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Grace to you and peace from God the Father, from Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
May be seated. Mark Twain wrote a lot for me. One of the more interesting things he wrote about Scripture, he said, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. He said, the part that troubles me about Scripture is not the parts that I don't understand. The parts that trouble me the most are the parts that I do understand. I think that's very timely, and I think it fits perfectly for our text this morning, especially our gospel lesson, because this is not one of those gospel readings that takes a lot of exegesis. It doesn't take a lot of professional research. It's one of what I call those pure texts. You can read it, and after 2,000 years, and most people who've been raised in the church or who've ever stepped foot in a church even a single time know what Jesus is talking about when he says he's going to have to undergo the suffering, the death, and then be raised again. It's not rocket science for us. We've all heard of it. Even in the popular culture, people know what it means when Jesus says he's going to be put to death. That involves an ugly death, a cross, and then almost everyone knows that Easter is really a celebration of chocolate bunnies. I mean, the resurrection. And so there's I think all of that is in play. I think what really disturbs us when we get to the core, I think, of the text is that it's really disturbing that the lay leaders of Jesus' time, the cult leaders, the religious leaders, whatever you want to call them. Cult's not a bad word. The cult leaders, the religious leaders, and then also the scriptural scholars, those who spent their days, their lives in the scriptures, studying the scriptures. Those groups, those are the ones who really immediately pounced on, not all of them, most of them, pounced on Jesus and his teaching and his ministry. And I think we find that really disturbing because those are the folks, even now, 21 centuries later, and in a whole different cultural environment, I realize that, a whole different world, we still find it a bit disturbing because, well, even in our time, hopefully we respect our lay leaders, our religious leaders, and certainly students of Scripture, at least to a certain point. I mean, it's okay to be skeptical and questioning. That's altogether different than no respect. And so the whole idea that we respect, in general, these folks that are in our lives and have been for centuries, is a little bit disturbing. I think mostly because we can see part of ourselves in those people, because we are those people. Everyone in this room is a lay leader. Many of you are students of Scripture. And every one of you can be a religious leader of some sort. I mean, it doesn't, any of us can stand up and lead prayers and do different things. So the point is that we see ourselves in these people and we wonder what could have been so horrible in Jesus' life, ministry, and teaching that these highly respectable folks would want to kill him. What could possibly have been so bad? These respected folks, members, astute people of the community would be in such fear of this one individual. What was he putting out? And I think it's important that we remember, and this is going to be a little bit disturbing, I think, for some people who've never really thought it all the way through, but the glitch in their plan to kill him was that if we really believe as Christians that Jesus Christ was the embodiment of God, if we really believe that Jesus is God's heart in real life, in the flesh, then when they are attempting to kill and eventually succeed in killing Jesus, they're killing God. There's a problem with that. I think at the time it happened, and even 21 centuries, I think if you really think that through, there's a struggle in there somewhere. Well, what does that mean when we're killing God? And I'm not talking about the philosophical movement that said God is dead. That's different. I'm talking about literally, physically, literally killing God. There's something to that, I think, that needs to be explored individually and corporately. So what was it? Well, we know that by this time in Mark's Gospel, he has set about showing what God's kingdom looks like on the earth. Not in the sweet by and by. We're talking about in the earth, in the present time. And I think it's interesting that even in our psalm, this is, a lot of people think Jesus came with a whole new message, and that is not true. It is just not true. He did help reinterpret some things from the older law, but mostly he came to show how it was supposed to be lived out in real life. And even in the psalm it says that God has always had a heart for the poor and the voiceless. Read it again. It's in there. And we read it almost every week somewhere in the Older Testament, that God has a heart for either those who cannot speak for themselves, the voiceless, certainly for the powerless, certainly for biblically speaking, the lame, those who have physical problems that just cannot get out, and certainly widows and orphans and refugees. All those different people are listed specifically, all the way from Genesis all the way through to the lesser prophets. And so the whole thing, God had this same heart. And all Jesus does is bring it back to the people's attention. This is God's heart. God intended for people not to be hungry. God did not intend for us to hand them a form to see if they were worthy first. God, and God tended, Jesus would raise people back into community. I know it could be argued in some of the old Levitical holiness code that certain people were to be, struck out of the community for this or that, and that's true. But as the people began to reinterpret for their day and age and for their time, they would say and realize that, that God's heart was always about people. The one thing is really interesting to me, especially when we consider what Jesus is speaking about today, which is his own untimely death and the manner in which it happened. The one thing, historically, all through from Genesis to Revelation, all through the whole Bible, the one thing, and the Bible study folks have best, I hope, remember, the one thing that infuriates God beyond almost all measure has nothing to do with our morality code, like people often think. It's one thing. Does anybody remember what it was? It starts with a V. Violence toward each other. God abhors human violence. Anytime we hurt each other, and the irony is, he was killed in the most violently humiliating possible way that they possibly could in his day and age. And so the one thing that God always spoke against, that's what, Sodom and Gomorrah, that's what that was about, the violence that they were doing to each other. And all of those big stories, Noah, you pick the big stories, almost always it has to do with God trying to eradicate the violence of humanity against each other. And there's a lot of different ways to do violence. It's not always bonking each other on the head. There's a lot of different ways to do violence. It's removing and somehow discouraging people, trying to steal people's dignity and their respect. And Jesus was forever coming behind and restoring, erasing those lines in the sand and say, you are a daughter of Israel. You are a son of Israel. He would raise them to new life and restore people back in the community. And for whatever reason, the general populace, why didn't they like it? I mean, that to me is a really hard question that we all need to ponder, especially through Lent. It seems to me that there's a reason these kinds of scriptures come up through this season. There's a reason and I will just give you a hint, because it seems to me that the part of Jesus' mission was as a prophet to name things for what they were. And it seems to me that part of the things that he named has to do with an age-old problem with humanity. And it has a lot to do with what I was talking about the kids. Is that we always feel like we need to be one up on everyone. And we always feel like that it's my group against your group. We tend to be very tribal in nature and in our DNA somehow. And Jesus resists that. And he resists it on every level. And most especially when it has to do with people's dignity and outright pain. If you want to follow me, he said, you're going to take up your own cross. Well, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And a lot of people think it's a big dramatic thing. I want to tell you this is a really interesting story. This happened, some of you may have been here, some of you may have not. Years ago, we had a big funeral here, and we had a particular musician. Now, with all of our musicians, I give them pretty much free reign. Like during the offering, play whatever you want, or choose what music you want. And I mean, I don't think it's my position to micromanage professionals. I think you should allow people to choose their own stuff. Well, it was the same way back then too. And this particular woman, she had practiced a particular song, and now the only line I've ever kind of drawn, and that's kind of an iffy line, is that I prefer sacred music in church for funerals and for weddings. And in other words, no, I don't particularly like hippie music even for weddings. If you want hippie music, it's fine, but I don't think it belongs to the church. And I think that's a funny word, hippie music. I'm saying it on purpose. But I think that in the church, if you want a church wedding, you should have churchy music. And there's stuff in the public arena that is perfectly fine. That just doesn't have to be in the hymnal. But anyway, nevertheless, this woman had practiced this one song. It wasn't a churchy song. It wasn't a hymnal song for sure. And anyway, and I guess whatever, during a certain part of the funeral liturgy, I said, it's your call. Well, she practiced this song one time, and I never heard her play it. I'd heard it once or twice, but I would never picked it out. And anyway, she said just on the fly, she said she was just in the moment. And she'd only played it one time before. And she said, just in that moment, I knew that this was the right song for the right time, and the right, there's a lot of folks here. Anyway, it was a beautiful, beautiful piece. And the words were such that it was the exact words that it seemed like at the time, for all of us who were here, is what everybody needed to hear. It had to do with imagining yourself in God's presence, even though it wasn't like a super churchy song. I know that sounds like it is, but it's imagining yourself, once here and then, suddenly just in God's presence and what that might be like. But it was a beautiful moment that could have gone very, very wrong. Depending on who's in attendance and a lot of different factors. When it was all over, of course, we all said thank you. And she said, it was a transformative moment because it was a big risk. Because on the one hand, I think that sometimes we feel those nudges by the Holy Spirit. And this is the kind of stuff I think our text speaks to. And sometimes we resist and say, can't do that. We kind of back off and we'll let someone else. That's not my thing. And many times God does raise up someone else, but not every time. It seems to me that more often than not, when we feel those nudges, it's if we step out in faith, and even if we mess it up, God honors that. And I think that has a whole lot to do with taking up our crosses, is just occasionally stepping out in that kind of faith. Well, again, at the end of this particular service, it could have gone very wrong. But it didn't. It turned out it was the right thing at the right time, the right place. And stepping out of faith, sometimes you have to trust that it's just going to be that way. If we really honor God's leading, then when we do that, and every now and then, I think we get it wrong. It's true. But I think God honors it anyway. It seems to me that we don't serve this harsh, mean God setting. I mentioned this before, in some puffy cloud with a scorecard. That's not how it works. That's not how it's set up. That's not the Jesus of the cross. That's not the Jesus in our text. That's not the cross he's talking about. The cross he's talking about has everything to do with being the people of God, standing for the principles Jesus stood for, And then every now and then, just stepping out in faith, more often than not, on someone else's behalf and for their sake. And it seems to me that's part of what this whole loving our neighbor thing is all about. And somewhere in that huge process, we're transformed. One small act of mercy, one small act of kindness at a time. It transforms us, it seems to me. And then the next time we feel that nudging, I think it seems to me that my experience has been, and I've heard this from many, many, many different people, that you have a little more confidence the next time. And then a little more confidence the next time. And even when you maybe have gotten it wrong, it's okay, because you get more right than you get wrong. And it seems to me that I've heard all kinds of interpretations of taking up our cross, but more often than not, it's that stepping out in faith. And if we really trust that Jesus is the God of the cross, the God who loved us that much, that God is going to honor those small steps and those small acts of faith. And that's the kinds of things I think it calls for in Lent. Why didn't we kill God? I want you to think about that this week. What could drive you to the point that you would want God to be dead? Just consider that. I'm not going to give you an answer because I don't think there is a good one. But for yourself, just consider that. And then in the meantime, listen for those nudges, those little faith steps. Amen? Amen. May the peace which passes all human understanding keep all our hearts and all of our minds in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen.